This is an analysis from Alpha Business Media. All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating economic story that's unfolding in Nepal. And this isn't just about farming, It's about a whole new generation of entrepreneurs who are basically re-engineering an entire industry right from the ground up. So let's kick things off with a number that really sets the stage. Get this, 300 billion Nepali rupees. That is the bill for food imports every single year. And this is in Nepal, a country where, over 60% of the population are farmers? So yeah, that right there, that brings us to the central paradox, doesn't it? How is it even possible that a nation of farmers is so dependent on food from other countries? You see, this isn't just some academic question. This points to a massive market failure. But, and this is key, where there's failure, there's also a massive opportunity. Okay, so to really get our heads around the solution, we've got to diagnose the actual problem first. We're talking about the disease, not just the symptoms. And look, we're not talking about the obvious stuff, like a lack of tractors or fertilizer. The root causes, they're way deeper, baked right into the very structure of the market itself. So the first big one, the first critical disease, is something economists call information asymmetry. Basically, in simple terms, it's when one person in a deal knows a lot more than the other. It creates this imbalance of power. And in agriculture, man, this imbalance is absolutely crippling. Just picture this for a second. You've got a farmer in a remote village, right? She has a perfect harvest of tomatoes. But the thing is, she has absolutely no idea what those tomatoes are actually worth in, say, Kathmandu's central market. So what happens? She sells to the first middleman who shows up at her door, often for just a fraction of their real value. That knowledge gap, it costs farmers dearly, harvest after harvest. All right, on to the second disease, market fragmentation. Think about it. The average farm in Nepal is tiny, under 1 hectare. So the country's entire agricultural landscape is like this mosaic of small, disconnected pieces. This means no single farmer can possibly meet the huge demand of a big hotel chain or a supermarket. And the cost of trying to coordinate and collect from hundreds of these tiny farms, it's just way too high. So what's the real-world cost of all this? What's the bottom line? Well, it's a staggering number, up to 40%. 40% of perishable goods can be lost after they're harvested. That's food that's already been grown, picked, and then just wasted, simply because there's no efficient way to get it from the farm to a buyer. But, and this is a big but, this is where the story takes a turn. You've got this new generation of entrepreneurs, and they're not just trying to patch up the old, broken system. No, they're building a whole new one right on top of it, and they're using a completely different playbook to do it. This right here, this quote, gets to the heart of it. They figured out that the most valuable thing isn't the potato itself. The key to unlocking real value wasn't about owning more land or growing more produce. It was about owning the information. Verifiable, real-time, actionable data, on-demand, supply, pricing, that's the new gold. So what does this actually look like in practice? How do they do it? Well, the traditional model, it's what we call asset-heavy. You have to own the farms, the trucks, the warehouses. It's super expensive and really, really slow to scale up. But this new platform model, it's asset-light. They don't own the farms, they partner with them. Their real assets are the technology, the data, and the trust they built. And this lets them scale incredibly fast because of network effects. And what's really crucial here is where these startups are focusing their energy. It's not on some trendy new app for you and me. Nope. They're all in on the B2B space. That's business to business. They're fixing the broken back-end supply chains for hotels, restaurants, and big institutions. So you see, their product isn't just vegetables. Their real product is coordination and, most importantly, reliability. And the process they use, it sounds almost deceptively simple. Step 1, they pull together all the demand from dozens of businesses. Step 2, they push that clear demand signal out to their network of farmers. Step 3, they handle that messy middle part, all the quality control and logistics. And finally, step 4, they fulfill the big combined order. What they're doing is creating an efficient market where one just didn't exist before. Now, this whole revolution, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was built on a very specific foundation, a few key things that made it all possible. But now it's starting to run into some pretty serious roadblocks that are slowing down its growth. So let's talk about the enablers. 3 key things really laid the groundwork for this. First, you've got incredibly high mobile phone penetration, over 130% saturation, believe it or not. Second, the rise of digital payment systems like Isawa and Kalti. That solves the whole cash problem. And third, and this is huge, a new wave of human capital. We're talking about Nepalis who've worked abroad, coming back with a global perspective but deep local knowledge. But even with all that great tech and talent, growth is hitting a wall. And that wall is policy. The single biggest bottleneck, by far, is the lack of a modern enforceable contract farming act. Without that law, a startup's promise to buy a farmer's harvest, well, it's not legally binding enough for a bank to lend against. And that chokes off access to formal credit for everybody in the supply chain. The other big barrier is the kind of money they need, the type of investment. You know, agriculture isn't like a software company. It has real-world frictions. You've got monsoons, landslides, crop failures. It just doesn't fit that hypergrowth, move fast and break things model of typical venture capital. What it really needs is something called patient capital. Investors who get the long game, who understand the cycles of farming, and who prioritize sustainable long-term growth over just explosive short-term returns. So all of this, it brings Nepal to a really critical strategic crossroads. The decisions made in the next few years, mostly by policymakers, are going to create one of two very, very different futures for the country's entire agricultural sector. And look, the question isn't really if these startups will survive. They're smart, they're resilient, they will. The real question is, what's their ultimate impact going to be on the national economy? Are they just going to be successful niche players, or can they be truly transformative? This table here really lays out those two possible paths quite clearly. So, on one hand, you have the boutique scenario. This is what happens if policies stay the same. The startups will do well, for sure, but only in high-margin niches. Their national impact will be pretty small. They just become these little islands of efficiency in a sea of dysfunction. But then you have this systemic scenario. This is what happens if the government takes action, especially on that contract law. That one change unlocks formal credit and allows these platforms to scale up massively, potentially reshaping the entire economy. Okay, so let's bring this all together for the final analysis. What's the one hard truth at the very center of this whole transformation? I think this analogy just captures the situation perfectly. You've got these incredible entrepreneurs building sophisticated 21st century software, but they're being forced to run that software on really outdated hardware. And that hardware, it's the country's physical infrastructure, sure, but even more importantly, it's the legal and regulatory framework. And that right there leaves us with one final critical question. The private sector. They've gone and built these powerful new engines for economic growth. But what good is an engine without tracks to run on? So at the end of the day, the success of this entire revolution hinges on a simple question. Will the state finally step up and build the tracks for these new engines? The answer will determine whether Nepal becomes a global model for agricultural innovation or just another case study of potential left on the table.